Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Fiction. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here. How many of you are visiting us for the first time this evening? Oh, great. Well, welcome. We're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction, and we're thrilled to celebrate the winner of the Penn Bellwether Prize tonight for socially engaged fiction, something that we also care very much about here. I want to say a special hello also to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. A few housekeeping announcements. We will do an audience Q&A, and if you have a question, just put your hand up and one of our interns will give you a microphone. That's so that the people who are watching on the live stream can also hear you. And if you're on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. So go ahead and start thinking about what you want to ask. When the event is over, you can go out the back doors there over to the bookstore and pick up your copy of the book. Jamila was kind enough to sign them all, but she will be happily personalizing them afterwards as well. All right, let me introduce our fabulous guest. Jamila Minnicks' novel Moonrise over New Jessup won the 2021 Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Her short fiction and essays are published or forthcoming in The Sun, Craft, Catapult, Blackbird, The Right Launch, and elsewhere. And her piece, Politics of Distraction, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. In 2022, Jamila was awarded a Tennessee Williams Scholarship for the Swanee Writers Conference, and she also earned a residency at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan, the Harvard University School of Law, and the Georgetown University Law Center, and she's joining us tonight from Washington, D.C., and Robert Jones Jr. is joining her in conversation. He's the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, The Prophets, which won the 2022 Publishing Triangle Edmund White Award for Debut Fiction and the 2022 NABA Book of the Year Award for Fiction. It was a finalist for the 2021 National Book Award and was named a notable book by the New York Times and one of the best books of 2021 by Time, Entertainment Weekly, USA Today, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, among many others. His writings have been featured in the New York Times, Essence, and the Paris Review, as well as in the critically acclaimed anthologies 400 Souls and the 1619 Project. Please welcome them both to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, helping me to celebrate this fantastic, fantastic book by Jamila Minnicks, Moonrise over New Jessup. I told Jamila when I first started reading this book that it was hands down the best book that I have read in years. It gave me the same feeling of awe and just loveliness and warmth that I felt when I was reading Toni Morrison's works, whether it be Sula, Song of Solomon, Beloved, Paradise, and the list goes on. I'm very excited to be here to talk to her about this book because it's such a transformative work. I've never read anything like it. It made me long for it made me long for something, and I wasn't sure what I was longing for, but I know now that what it made me long for was home. So, without further ado.
See, you have me up here tearing up already, Robert. I put on bottom mascara tonight, too.
I think the first thing I want to know before I get into the specifics of Moonrise is, how did you learn to write? How does one go from law, because she's a lawyer, y'all, to a fiction writer of this caliber, because the writing is extraordinary. Talk about your journey.
So I graduated from law school. I practiced for several years, and legal writing is sort of the anti-creative writing. So I was always looking, I'm somebody who's very curious, and I was always sort of looking for a way to express myself and ask questions in a way that I could interrogate my own thoughts about things, interrogate what the world thought about things, all sorts of stuff. And, I learned to write stories by listening to stories. I mean, my family is full of storytellers, right? And so Alice is really all the really powerful women in my family all rolled up into one. And, the people in New Jessup are just the people, literally, my ancestors and elders who I've known or heard about my entire life.
And so you went from this profession that was the anti-literature
Yes.
to writing something with such beautiful language. Like, I know you're not going to read from the book, but when you guys read the book, the opening is one of the best openings I have ever read, talking about stitching moonlight together and stuff. It was just, it was just so beautiful. It's one of those kinds of experiences where when you're a writer, you go, damn it, why didn't I think of that? And so talk about where the language for this came from, because I know that you're very much a person who honors and venerates the ancestors and has deep, deep respect for the elders. So talk to me about how that might have informed the beauty of the language of New Jessup.
We were talking about this just a few minutes ago about how Black people, we've been forced into situations where we had to learn languages, different languages. We had to learn to communicate with one another. And from our the sort of malleable way that we've approached language, we have come up with something that is so beautiful in the way we communicate with each other and the way we continue to innovate language. And I feel like my goal in writing Alice and her folks was not to write something as like a translation of like, this is how Black people talk and this is how we sound, ha ha. But it was really for me to render Alice's story for true. And that's a very different thing because it affects who my audience is, how I tell the story, who I'm talking to. But I just wanted, in writing this, like Alice very much speaks to me. So it would be one thing, it would be a disservice to her and to the elders and to the ancestors then to take what she's saying to me and then mix it up and play with it just to put it on the page. That's not my business to do.
I remember Toni Morrison once saying in an interview that what you just said, she's not writing to translate language. She said, in my life, I never heard a Black person say gwine. You know how they write, when they're writing the slaves, they use that word? She said, I never heard a Black person say that. I say what they mean.
Right.
And so that New Jessup is very much in that tradition of where they sound like my people.
Right.
In plain language.
Right.
But also in such luscious and beautiful language.
Well, because we use luscious and beautiful language. We invent luscious and beautiful language. I think about how we were taken from Africa and we spoke, I don't know how many languages. How many languages you think we've lost over time? You were just talking about your family losing the Gullah language, right? How many people in the history were the last person who spoke that language? But then we come here, right? We have to learn English, Dutch, French, and Spanish in order to just survive. Like I speak English okay, French sometimes, and I know a couple words in Italian, but these are people, enslaved people, who had to know sometimes 4 languages in order just to survive in this country. Now, plus what we came over with and what we tried to retain. Now, when you have that sort of ability with words, what else are we going to do with it but innovate and create and make something incredibly special and something entirely all our own?
Okay, for this one, I'm going to read the question because it's an essay question.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
One of the things I love most about New Jessup, the book and the town, is what it makes me remember about the kind of Black community I grew up in.
Yeah.
I'm thinking now of Alice getting off the bus and going to the local church and being taken in by Pastor and Mrs. Brown, becoming Mrs. Brown's apprentice before eventually going to work for Miss Vivian Taylor. Y'all, Miss Vivian Taylor can only be played by the one Diane Carroll. And it's such a shame that she's not here. It's such a shame that she's not here anymore, but she would have been a perfect Miss Vivian.
She would have been a perfect Miss Vivian.
I remember things like that actually happening regularly, of orphans becoming kin and us looking out for each other's well-being being a mandatory act. Where do you think we can find this kind of roomy love today?
You know, so I think that a lot of community, because all you're talking about is Alice coming into a space where she's finding community. Alice gets off the bus, and she is to me what the women in my family are. We're smart, we're dynamic, we're creative, and we know our own minds. Like, she gets off the bus, and she comes from a separate part of Jim Crow into this place where she sees folks thriving, and she's like, wait a minute, this is a place where I can be all those things, and I can just be all those things. I'm free to be whatever it is I'm capable of being. And I'm also free to be vulnerable. I'm also free to come into this space. Like, you're talking about community, right? And so often when I talk to readers, they're saying they're craving this. And I think that we have the desire for it. I think these communities like New Jessup came up because where were they going to go? You know, in 1903, everybody's child has the ability to get snake bit and get fever in that swamp. Where were they going to go? And it's not to say that we need to be in some incredibly dire condition, but to be Black in this country, we need each other. And so I feel like when we recognize that in ways large and small, I'm talking, you know, even coming into this writing business, right? I have been so lovingly embraced by you and Disha and Kiese and Maurice and all these Black writers. It's like me getting off that bus. And when we find that in ways large and small, I think it's something that we want to fight to protect, and we want to fight and bring other people in. So, you know, I have hope and confidence that we recognize those enclaves, whether it's a town or a city or a community, writing community. I have to have hope. Our ancestors had hope, and if they didn't have hope, we wouldn't be here.
Church, say amen. Why does Alice become a seamstress? That seemed to me, like from a writerly mind, to be such a deliberate choice. And I also feel like the opening sort of gives us a clue as to why seamstress, but tell us why.
So that was a nod to my grandmama.
Okay.
So my grandmama was a seamstress, so that's why I chose that for Alice.
My grandmother was also a seamstress. Worked in a factory. Remember, she took me when I was in kindergarten. Black windows from all the dust of all that stuff. Those were the conditions they were working under in the 70s. In Bushwick, Brooklyn. That's where she worked, in a warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Can we talk about Mama's Garden?
Yeah.
And what it means beyond being a garden, and how you rendered it so lusciously. And I want to read how you talked about the garden. On page 33, for anyone who's following along. Mesmerized, I was already through an expanse of grass yard before I even asked to see a blade. Ahead, there was a row of tall and short logs between the carpet of green and the golden, spent stalks of dead cornfield. I spied the edge of a vegetable garden in the back, where weeds littered neglected, if neat, 100-foot rolls of soil. Trees dotted with pink and white flowers, teased of peaches and cherries growing beneath the blossoms. But beyond the cornfield, for further acres than an eye could see, was an array of hydrangeas and azaleas and roses and peonies and camellias and crepe myrtles and jacaranda and forsythia and hibiscus and bushes and trees and vines and flowers I didn't recognize, exploding on the land until God just ran out of color. Have mercy. Talk to me about that, please.
So Alice comes to New Jessup, and she has come from this place where her daddy, she worked as a tenant farmer. Her daddy was sort of a jack of all trades. Her parents had worked the cotton. They had worked wherever there were hands needed for years. Alice, because of that, as much as she may have hated the system that kept them in that perpetual state of poverty, she loved the soil. And so that particular section is her telling us, I can love the soil. I love this soil. I love Alabama. Because she says over and over in the book, I never wanted to leave Alabama. And so this was just one of the many ways that we get to meet Alice and see her gifts and talents. We get to see Alice really opening her eyes, not just to the beauty of the garden, but the land. Because all of that is also her being in awe that all that land belongs to the Campbells. You know, what did her daddy want? What was the whole thing that he stayed in their entire life? All he wanted was a little piece of Alabama.
I also feel like it is her way to commune with Raymond's mother. In a lot of ways. You know, there's a lot of ghosts in this book.
Yeah.
It also seems like this novel is trying to clarify something about somebody in particular, Booker T. Washington, who's perceived with modern eyes in a very particular way. He's often looked down upon, scorned, seen as house Negro or what have you. Or worse. Was this done with intention?
You know, everything in this book is a craft choice. With regard to our history, when we view it in such a reductive way, when we view our own history in a reductive way, that serves nobody. All of the heroes and villains, I mean, people have asked me, who are the heroes and the villains in the book? And I say, we're all people. Like, we all have good traits and bad traits. None of us are perfect. And certainly Booker T. and Du Bois were men. You know, we've gotten to the point where we vilified or deified these men depending on who you're talking to. But I think without understanding the full context of who they were and where they came from, we can't begin to understand the positions that they advocated. So, you know, there's been work, I think, that talks about particular people in this way, and it sort of expands the work based on a philosophy. But New Jessup came from a whole bunch of folks that had literally been put into the swamp. And so they had the opportunity. They were at that crossroads and could have said, we want to choose this philosophy or this philosophy. Then you have this whole other group like, while y'all are over here fussing about philosophy, your kids are out here and need to be fed. So we need to get to work.
Right.
And I think over time, you know, what suited the particular community was all that mattered. So, you know, clarify, I don't know if it's to clarify, but it's to say, hey, look, we need to stop treating folks like heroes and villains, because dividing those two men serves nobody. Both of them had philosophies that we all live by today. Both of them had philosophies we roundly reject today. But when it's time to get to work, we need to take a more expansive view of what our history, the marching orders that our history gives us.
Speaking of philosophy, talk to me about the National Negro Advancement Society, the NNAS, which some reviewers have mistakenly confused with the NAACP or SNCC.
I don't understand that. You know, Nick, you know, so I'll tell you, so I spoke to Dr. Jeffries a few weeks ago, and he said, I get a little bit of SNCC vibes from Raymond. I said, I mean, but I mean, I'll take that a little bit.
What was your intention behind the invention of this organization? Because you invented this organization.
That's right.
What purpose does it serve? And what exactly is it that the NNAS is attempting to do?
So in the book, the NNAS, National Negro Advancement Society, the purpose of introducing them into the book is to show that there is this this sort of national freedom rights movement that's finding foothold at the time. And it's been sort of integral in Brown versus the Board of Education. I mean, there are these groups that are forming and sort of trying to find their footing and trying to figure out their philosophy, so to speak. And so on a national level, they have, like, they're all for integration, they're all for, ending desegregation, and really have one specific philosophy when it comes to that. But Raymond is like, hey, listen, all politics is local. And it's great that you have these ideas about what needs to happen all around the country. But right here in New Jessup, Alabama, we've been doing this. We have these particular needs. So, it's not perfect, but he really forces them to take a hard look at what New Jessup is, what the best needs are for New Jessup. And I think when you talk about, there were these movements in Alabama where folks were like, this is great and all love and whatever, but that's a little bit pie in the sky and my kids ain't got no shoes. Right. So it's really this conversation between the really local, hyper-local activists and what's happening on a national level, and to see that there is way to compromise and there are conversations to be had. We don't have to vilify each other, or we can actually listen to each other and say, hey, let's try this out, because if people can solve anti-blackness and racism in this country, the first person that does it, hey, I'm with you. But until we have one solution that fits all, I think that's the whole beauty of the NNAS, is it gave Raymond and the fellas and Patience the opportunity to try something a little new.
And you and I have talked about this before, how oftentimes you'll hear Black people say, well, my grandparents said it was better during segregation.
God, no, they didn't.
And they
don't ever say that.
Right. Right.
They didn't say that.
They did not say that.
They didn't say that.
And they were misunderstood. What your grandparents were actually saying was what? That
they were better off being independent, that they were better off having their own. And so I've had this conversation where people say, yeah, my granddaddy said it was better in segregation. I said, no, your granddaddy didn't say that. I don't know your granddaddy, and I know he didn't say that. Because segregation was a system of laws that was literally designed to uphold white supremacy and to create a caste system in this country. It said we couldn't eat here, swim there, worship there, pray here. We couldn't go to school over here. We couldn't. We couldn't go through the same doors. We couldn't drink from the same water fountains. There was all these different laws that were designed to maintain our degradation. There were laws that allowed people to discriminate against us in employment, and then allowed people to discriminate against us in employment, and then we would get arrested for not having jobs, right? There were laws in Alabama that said, in some local jurisdictions, said we couldn't own a dog or a gun. In the Second Amendment is king country. We couldn't own a dog or a gun. So segregation is not the word. So right. When we talk to our elders and when they recount to us what the ancestors talked about, it's really this idea that we were better off being self-reliant. We were living independently. We were finding different ways we were considering different ways of freedom. We were, self-governing, self-determining, but there are about 1,000 better words than segregation. And so, I come from a profession where words matter. We're in a profession where words matter. And I understand that people have been using this word segregation as like a shorthand.
Right.
But A, when you know better, you do better. And B, segregation needs and deserves to go down in history as the wretched system that it was. We don't need to create this shroud of innocence over it, because it was a nasty, festering, wretched thing that this country upheld for way too long.
Preach, Pastor. Okay, this is another.
Sorry, that drives me crazy a little bit. So.
This one is another thesis question. Okay. New Jessup is dreamlike, but it is not a dream. It is very much a reality in important ways, not just historically, but contemporaneously. Am I to understand that you've encountered some resistance to the idea of New Jessup during your promotion of this book? The vision of an all-Black and thriving town still in 2023 seems to make some people shudder. I imagine that it's the same impulse that made them get into decommissioned World War I planes and bomb Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. My grandfather was alive in 1921, mind you. What do you think is behind that? What do you think people are inventing in their own minds about an independent and minding our own business Black community that terrifies them so much that their base impulse is to, by whatever means necessary, destroy it?
I think people are looking in the mirror and saying, and they're worried about what all we're doing over there. I've had people say, this book promotes discrimination. I've had people say, and this was when they know the premise of the book, that they're worried that Black people wanted to like enslave them. So it's a lot of really far out sort of, like I honestly don't know how to address it other than to just leave it alone. I can't get into the mind, and here's the thing. I have tried, like I for a while there, I got a couple of really nasty messages, and I said, I don't understand what a book about Black people minding our own Black business has everybody up and scared about. Even though I did sort of really know, I think we all sort of know. But then I said, every minute, because we all have a predetermined set of minutes to live, right? I don't know who determines it, whoever your God is or whoever you pray to has determined our minutes already. And so I could spend those minutes trying to get into the mind of craziness. And those are some dark places, I'm sure. Or I could spend that time really doing for my community. And, it's like if I have 15 minutes left in the world, or if I have 15 minutes right now, I'm not so interested in getting into those folks' minds. I'm just not. They don't seem to be that interested in being in their own minds, so why would I want to go and wallow around in there?
I'm reminded of, again, I go to Morrison because she's like the one, where she was talking to Charlie Rose.
Yeah.
You remember when she said, if you can only be tall, if someone is on their knees, then you have a very serious problem.
Yeah.
And that's how I think of it, is that in this country, maybe in the world, whiteness is defined by Black subjugation. So to see a successful Black person or a successful Black industry or a successful Black town or community or country is almost an insult, because then what does white mean? Like,
exactly.
I think of
Exactly.
I think of like when Barack Obama got elected, and certain segments of white America lost its collective mind because what does white mean if a Black man can be president of the United States? And so their revenge was, we're going to sully the presidency such that we are going to find the least qualified white man we can find. And we're going to elect him just to show you that that Black ass being in that seat didn't mean anything. So they elected Trump, and they're about to elect DeSantis. And, so it's the only reason why I'm concerned about it, because my safety is tied to it.
Well, right. And so here's the thing. We talk about DeSantis and Trump. That's decades of gerrymandering work. I mean, that's voting on the very hyper-local level. That's electing officials who are then going to go to the state houses and redraw these districts to look...
Talk about it.
I mean, to look like like a strand of spaghetti, you know, and it's like, this is a district, but it's like a curlicue, you know, and it doesn't make any sense other than people know in this very local way that we can get this district to vote in a certain way. So that's decades worth of work that goes into that. When we talk about DeSantis and these people, I honestly, I have to have hope, but more than hope, I know that we need to be educating folks. We need to be educating folks about the importance of why it is that we want people to vote. We need to be educating folks. Like I think about back when in Reconstruction, we were literally teaching people in Alabama. We had like all these freedom schools. We were teaching people their rights so that they knew their civic duties. And then up through past when this book takes place, people were like, this is what a sheriff is supposed to do. And Dr. Jeffrey's book, Bloody Lounds, he actually has the diagrams, and it says the sheriff is supposed to protect the peace, and it was very simple, but what's so powerful about that was that the sheriff wasn't doing any of it for Black people. And so people see these things and they're like, protect the peace, protect and serve, you know, put crooks in jail. And it's like, we literally are having people lynched, and the sheriff is part of the mob. And so collectively, you know, this is all, so we talk about like systemic racism. There are all these different ways that we are dehumanized, whether it's through media, and this is all that Black people are in the perpetual passing around of our death, or our degradation in some way. It's through the indoctrination of our history books. So all of this leads to a general malaise and apathy, right?
Right.
But that's why Moonrise, I feel like, is so important, at least to me, because I'm enjoying and I'm seeing people like a light bulb go on. Young Black people, older Black people, saying, this book is helping me to heal with the past and also to understand that there are people in our past who really cared about our present, didn't know us, would never know us, but they cared about our present. I mean, I can't solve all the world's problems. You can't solve all the world's problems. We can write, and somebody who's going to read your book, and hopefully somebody who's going to read my book, is going to be somebody who gets their butt in a seat, get somewhere where they can make a concrete change that you and I can't make.
And that, I think what you're talking about, you've read the studies where fiction actually helps people develop empathy and critical thinking, fiction in particular. Of all the literature. And it makes sense then why there's been this banning rage of banning all of these books. I anticipate that at some point somebody's going to challenge New Jessup, because this book for me was so empowering. All of the things it made me remember that was somewhere in my consciousness floating around, but brought back to the forefront. I think I told you, when I was reading this book, preparing to blurb it for Jamila and her team, when I got about maybe 20, 30 pages in, I started texting her my reactions as I was going along. And I was just like, oh, no, he didn't. And, and, going on and on and on. And then I called her, I FaceTimed her after I was done in tears.
Yeah.
And I told you, and I was like, I'm crying because I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
That's the feeling you get when you read New Jessup, is that you don't want to leave because you close that page, close that book, and then you're back in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn is nice. But Brooklyn is not New Jessup.
No.
And I really, really long for that. But getting back to the book, there are moments in this novel that are sublimely rendered. The opening, which is I think one of the best openings of a book since 124 was Spiteful, full of a baby's venom.
That's beloved, y'all.
Alice and Percy's discussion in the supermarket.
Yeah.
Oh, that tension was so that was perfect. Like, that scene couldn't have been written any better. Oh my God, that was perfect. Simeon at Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh, well, you know he was a mess, though. When he walked in the door, you mean? Oh, and he was throwing around all those compliments.
Yes.
Because we all know somebody like that.
Exactly. That was exactly
Mr. I know
why.
every right thing to say to everybody.
And Alice looking at him side-eye like, I know what this is. The pig roast.
In Mississippi, they said it made them hungry. That pig roast. But that's the pig roast we used to have up in Stony Creek, Virginia. That's all that.
Okay, this other one that was like a really tense moment for me in the book was Alice and Patient's confrontation in D.C. Some of these scenes are just cinematic. Like, please read this book, y'all. Amazing. Another one, the description of how the ancestors and elders went into the swamp and turned that swamp into New Jessup. That's like a creation story. That's like, it was biblical to me.
But that's what they had to do. I mean, that's what they had to do. We talk about Greenwood. We talked about Greenwood earlier, right?
Yes.
Greenwood was founded in 1905. Now, we all talk about 1921 and the white racist riot that wiped Greenwood off the map. We don't talk about enough the fact that Greenwood was founded in 1905.
Right.
16 years, right? And it was founded in Oklahoma when Oklahoma wasn't even Oklahoma, right? Tulsa wasn't Tulsa, right? So they're out here and all you see is basically desert, right? From that, in 16 years, they built hotels, savings and loans, homes, churches, schools. Churches and schools were first,
Right.
you know? But they built neighborhoods, multiple story homes. They had theaters, hotels. I mean, they had what always just cracks my imagination. They had photography studios.
And they dressed to the nines.
And they dressed to the nines, right? They were driving cars in Greenwood. And why that sticks with me is that, and why I get so aggravated, because we as Black people deserve to be the center of our own stories. And in New Jessup, we're the center. And you asked why I think white people are so upset. I think it's because you can literally not find them in the center of the story. And in fact, Alice calls them Black damn because she's like, they're all around, but they're not here. They're not right in the middle. And what breaks my heart about Greenwood is we talk about Greenwood and the first thing people say is, oh, but they took it away. I'm like, can you name me 3 things that they took? We've elevated white racist violence over the contributions, the accomplishments, the ingenuity, the make a way out of no way of our ancestors and our elders.
15 cents.
I mean, why? This is not to just, you and I have talked about white racist violence in this country. Ain't nothing new under the sun, right? But we need to learn to elevate and center ourselves in our own stories. And when we have conversations about New Jessup and about Greenwood, yes, we need to understand and remember those survivors are still alive litigating what happened in Greenwood.
Yes.
They rebuilt Greenwood, not to what it was, but they rebuilt Greenwood. We need to honor the ancestors and elders who never would have asked for a thing. That's what's so special to me about this book. That's not for me, it's for us. It's for us to say thank you to our ancestors and elders for dreaming big enough that you and I could be sitting here in this fancy building having this conversation.
Good night. That's beautiful and so true. And it brings me now to my favorite scene in the book. This is my hands down favorite scene in the book. I think you're gonna know what I'm talking about. I call it the tee-hee-hee scene, because this is when Alice convinces Dot to get up in the dark at night and go with her as she went to go protect New Jessup. She takes her rifle, she finds the rifle in the cabinet, put the babies in the car, let's go. And she gets out there and she has these interlopers in her sight.
She sure does.
and she's about to put it all on the line to protect what they have built here in New Jessup.
That's right.
Talk to me about how this woman who just had a baby is going out there with a shotgun,
A rifle.
a rifle,
A deer rifle.
to help her husband fight off a riot, a racist mob. Like, where is that in her to bring her sister-in-law with her too, in this old car that they fixed up, to do this? That is probably the greatest act of love that I've ever seen in fiction.
Really?
And I think the reason why I think that is because usually that's reserved for men. That kind of duty, that sense of duty and honor. You don't really often get to see women characters carry that sort of thing out. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't read it. There's an interruption which aggravated me because I actually wanted to see her take it all the way there. But talk to me about that spirit in Alice that would get her up to do something like that.
So I'm going to go one further with you, because you said it's something reserved for men. I'm going to say, and like the role of like the domesticity, like the good housewife, if you will.
Right.
I'm going to say that that's a role, this domestic role, is largely in the American collective imagination reserved for white women. We don't get that. We don't get that you should be at home, which is why Raymond is so proud to do the things that he does, because he can stand up and say, I can be a man that can take care of my family, and nobody can tell me and my wife and my children where to be. But Alice comes from a place where women had to do everything. They were out there in the cotton fields right next to the men. They were hunting right next to the men. And it wasn't, there was none of this, you're a black woman. And it's not that we weren't valued, but it's that the collective American imagination doesn't put us in that same place. And because of her, because of how she came up, Raymond said, I love my little country girl, right? She has this sensibility about the world that the women who she's encountering in New Jessup maybe didn't really have. But Alice is, in a lot of ways, she's the woman that black women are always expected to be. We don't get that sort of era of innocence and this sort of, we're supposed to, what did Zora Neale Hurston say? Black women are the mules of the world, right? So it's not that Alice was a mule, but Alice came up thinking, I have to be able to do everything. And so if somebody's coming to my house and my land and threatening my men and my business, because remember, she called it her business, right? So she said, you not coming here today. Because if this is all gonna be mine, like she says, if these are my men to care for and this is my land to care for, I'm gonna do it the best way I know how.
And Dot didn't really want to go, but she went. Why did Dot go?
Well, Dot wanted to let the man handle it.
Right.
Remember, Dot came up in New Jessup, and so
Right.
that's one of the things, the very special things about New Jessup, is it did have this opportunity for Dot to be where she was, right? She wanted the men to handle it. She wanted them to be home and be safe. She was also saying she wanted everybody to sort of play a particular role. Dot's also on the opposite end of the spectrum. Dot's 8.5 months along, right?
Right.
And so she's like, you're not going to leave me here with these babies, because Alice was originally going to leave her.
Right.
And Alice, because she is, I think the female sensibility in Alice says, I can't leave my sister-in-law here worrying her to death with these 2 babies while I'm out fooling around and all this other stuff is going on over there. But she's like, but I can't. She's split. But Dot, I think, recognizes that. She says, okay, just get some brandy on the gums and let's go.
I only have time for one more question, and I have like 13 more questions to ask you.
I told you, it was like 2 pages of questions.
I guess I'm going to end it on this, and I know you're tired of me asking you about this,
Oh,
but
Lord have mercy.
Alice has a sister named Rosie, and she's the great mystery of this novel because we don't know her whereabouts. But she's also a ghost in this story, and her spirit is all up and through the story, and every time Alice looks up into the sky, that's who she sees. Will we ever see Rosie again?
Robert. I think it's time to go to questions from the audience.
We do have, it is time for Q&A. It is time for the Q&A. So if anyone has questions, please ask.
Please don't be
At
shy.
home or in here.
You can raise your hand and we'll bring over a mic to you.
I won't ask about Rosie. Jamila, I know you've been on tour over the last 6 weeks or something, and it was so nice, Robert, hearing your kind of real-time reaction to reading the book. How has it been as a debut writer having people receive and react to your work?
Oh, it's been spectacular. You know, to see the elders say, this is our story. You know, I always said if I couldn't do Right by Alabama, I never would have written the story. It's just been spectacular to see Black people. I mean, I wrote this book for Black people so that we could see ourselves in history. I invite everybody in to the space, but it was really important to me to see Black people pick this book up and say, I see my grandmama. You told me that time you told me about your grandmama's, Big Mama's porch swing.
Yes.
And you said you remembered shelling peas.
Shucking peas, corn, all of that on the porch.
That to me is so meaningful. So that's just been such a gift and such a blessing to hear us really responding well to it. But I think overall the tour has just been fantastic.
Does anyone else have any questions? I have more questions. Oh.
Hello, Jamila.
Hello.
I want to know how, as you were writing the book, and also as you were going through the editorial process, you were able to keep the white gaze from infiltrating the book.
That's a great question. So, to me, it is a question of audience. So, from the very first moment, I knew that this was her story. I envisioned, I had an audience in mind, and Toni Morrison always said, my audience is the people in the book. So one of the ways that I think white gaze really infiltrates a book is when we start explaining stuff that we already know, right? So fitna, I ain't finna go here, we ain't finna do this, we ain't finna have that conversation. If I either explain outright what finna is, or if I do some sort of creative magic and say, you said finna, blah, 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 and I sort of explain it that way, then I'm not speaking to us, because we know finna, right? And so I think it's really important when you're really trying to exclude the white gaze, actively exclude it on every page. It's a question of language, it's a question of audience, and you you really do have to reject these ideas that are sort of baked into the whole process of likability and relatability, because I always say Alice's folks like her just fine. I envision her telling this story after that pig roast to the closest people. It's Major just says, we should be cleaning up. He says, hey, Alice, why don't you tell us the story of how you came to New Jessup again, right? And so she settles in to tell a story to her closest kin. And in that sort of setting, where she's going to divulge secrets that maybe she's never told, where she's going to have exposed vulnerabilities that she maybe never has before, she's not going to be explaining little tidbits. She's going to be using language that comes most naturally to her to just talk to her folks. And by doing that, by making sure that you stay in that sort of cadence in her language, you do end up saying, this is for my folks. And, you know, it's not that, like I said, white people can't read the book. I invite everybody to read it. But, you know, I don't like to use words like decentering because I think that that comes from a place of negativity. And we're always that's like an act of fighting. What's wrong with just saying we're centering black people? And by doing that, then it opens you up to so much more in your story and it's just a conversation.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that question?
Sure.
Is there a price to pay?
You know, I think that's relative. If I don't want to say, well, let me say it like this. I'm not going to come from a place of negativity.
Okay.
I'm going to say that the people I wrote this book for are responding to it well. I'm going to say that the black people who read this book in particular really seem to appreciate what they're finding in the book. I'm going to say that everything ain't for everybody. There are plenty of white readers and readers of all cultures. People from, are buying the book, I guess, all over the world. So people are reading this book and consuming it and finding something in it. But there are people who say, Alice, she's not very interesting. And I'm like, hey, that's fine. Everything literally ain't for everybody. So is there a price to pay? Perhaps. But I'm willing to pay that price in order to get our history on the page in a way that it deserves to be rendered. Yes,
Auntie
ma'am.
Arlene.
Yes, ma'am. This is my Auntie Arlene, y'all. So.
I'm not going to bring out your grandfather, because if he were here, he would be very, very proud of you, and as we are.
Amen.
We are very proud of you. But one thing that I have not read the whole book. I read parts of it, and I can say that it's very authentic to my life. I have lived a lot of this that you have written. So this goes beyond fiction to our truth. And I really hope that everyone who reads this book will understand that this is our truth. Even though you fictionalized it, this is very true. Everything I've heard tonight, the questions that you have asked, very relevant questions, they apply to us. So if anybody and I find it very ironic that this is Black History Month and we're discussing this book. I'm very grateful for that. And my prayer is that people will understand that when you read this, it's way beyond fiction. Thank you.
That's my auntie.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Don't be shy. If not, I think there's a question back there, yes.
Thank you so much. I just wondered, could you tell us about the cover of the book?
Yes, I love this question. So you'll notice that the book has this really, really, really rich, deep black. Oh, yeah, it's right there. And then there are these flowers bursting from the cover. And, you know, Alice, as I've mentioned, comes to New Jessup, and she really is in this place. She's lost her daddy, her mom has passed away. She's looking for her sister, and she has just escaped a pretty horrific situation with her landlord. So she's coming to this place where she's discovering for the first time what it means to be free to be. And she sees this really flourishing town. I mean, she sees people walking by in these red-heeled shoes. She sees brickfront shops and wide avenues and black police officers, and she sort of sees all this for the first time. She realizes she's in this place where she can rise and shine when she's surrounded by blackness. And so that's where the Moonrise comes from, because then she can fulfill all of her gifts and talents and realize that. So I really wanted this deep, deep black to represent three things. First, I wanted it to represent blackness, us, black people, being around, all enveloping, all encompassing. Second, I wanted it, because this takes place in the Black Belt of Alabama. The Black Belt soil is really, really, really rich, deep, dark soil. And so I wanted to pay homage. This is sort of my secret homage, not so secret homage, to Alabama and the soil where my mama's family hunted and grew food, and with the lakes and rivers where we fished and swam and we were baptized for at least 4 generations. So I wanted to pay homage to the Black Belt. And it's also the night sky, and the night sky is important because a lot of these flowers on here, like the gardenias, I call them 4 o'clocks, and there are moonflowers, they all thrive, they all bloom at night. And so I wanted to show this really rich, deep, thriving group of flowers that were thriving in blackness. So that's where the cover comes from. So
My goodness.
a lot of people say that they like it, so I'm glad to know that it resonates, but there's definitely a subversive message behind it.
No, it's absolutely beautiful. This is a beautiful cover.
Thank you.
And we have time for one more question from our live audience and then one question from our virtual audience.
All right, now or never.
This young lady here.
So I'm a bit curious about the order that you wrote this novel in. Did you write this in a linear order from the very beginning until the very end? Or was there kind of like a relationship, a scenario, like a scene, or something that kind of sparked into your mind, which you then wrote first and then built it into something bigger?
No, I wrote it from beginning to end. I mean,
Wow.
the novel itself is a braided narrative, but I wrote it from beginning to end at first. Yeah, that's a good question.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah.
I can't write that way.
I mean, but that's like obviously the first draft, which, and then you go back and you add stuff.
I always write the end first.
Really? I didn't know the end. I was just as surprised as Alice. I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this. Then I
Wow.
cried.
It's a beautiful ending, too.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
And
That's a good question.
our final question from Queen D on the live stream is, when this book becomes a series or movie, who do you see playing these characters?
I mean, y'all have to ask Robert, because Robert has casted this whole thing already, and it has not been optioned.
I think we said Raymond is Aldis Hodge.
Yes, we
who
did.
played Hawkman in Black Adam, if anybody that saw that movie. And we've been going back and forth because, casting a book is you got to get the right actor for those parts. Like I said, Diane Carroll should be Miss Vivian, but she's no longer with us.
But we got to find a part. You know who we have to find a part for is Margaret Avery. She plays Suge Avery in
Suge
The Color.
Avery.
We got to find a part for her. There's got
she
to
played
be.
Miss Brown.
You think?
Yeah.
Oh, she would play Miss Brown now. But Alice, that's my cousin, by the way, asking this brain teaser. You're supposed to be here, Danielle. I don't know. I'm gonna have to get back to you, cuz I'm not sure.
Remember, I said I thought it should be the young lady from the Baldwin film, the James Baldwin film.
Yes.
What was the film?
If Bill Street.
If Beale Street Could Talk, the young lady who played her, the main character.
We gotta
there.
put it in the universe. We also gotta get Regina King to direct it.
Regina.
We have to put that. You have to speak it, manifest it.
Look, Viola Davis manifested the Woman King.
That's what I'm saying.
So.
That's what I'm saying. All right.
All right, Jamila.
Robert.
I just want to say this before we end. We have a few seconds left. Moonrise over New Jessup is canonical. This is on the bookshelf with Go Tell It on the Mountain, Their Eyes Were Watching God, The Black of the Berry, Invisible Man, The Bluest Eye. This sits right up next to those books. This book is a instant classic. It is why I felt, I blurbed this book halfway. I was only halfway through this book when I blurbed it because it moved me that much. Irrespective of what happens to this book in the literary world, this book is life-changing in the real world. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you for doing it. I love you.
Thank you both. I really feel like you honored us with this conversation tonight. I'm really grateful for it. Thank you. And thank you all for being here for it. And please
I
go.
gotta get a picture because I never take good pictures.
Yeah.
So everybody say cheese.
Hold up your book if you have one.
Okay, Robert, your turn. You gotta hold up all those tabs too. Oh, let me get the shoes. All right. Okay. Thank y'all so much.
All right, go get your books and come back and we'll see you in a bit.
This stage is so beautiful.
I know.